The New START Treaty for nuclear arms control expired in February 2026. For the first time in over half a century, USA and Russia, the two largest nuclear powers on Earth, are flying blind. A void where the rules used to be. But this is about so much more than that. The Polish president's recent statements calling for the country to develop nuclear defense systems, Germany urging France to increase defense spending, Marco Rubio's controversial speech at the Munich Security Conference. These are not isolated headlines, they're signals, symptoms of the same infection, the end of the unipolar moment, and the return of great power competition. Today we're dissecting the consequences of the transition to a multipolar world, a new arms race, the potential for the third nuclear era, and the rise of resource realism. Broadcast commencing in. We're seeing a return of 19th century geopolitical logic. Might makes right. States have always worked to advance their own interests, but as I pointed out in my recent video on the return of 19th century geopolitics, there's a reason why this moment feels so different. States are less constrained by international laws, by international norms than they have been in decades. It's not that states haven't always acted in one way or another towards their own interests. It's the impunity. The death of performance. The lack of legal theatre, of justification. The focus on raw power politics and strategic interests. Just look at Maduro's capture in Venezuela by US forces. In the wake of World War II and with the Cold War emerging, countries wanted structures and frameworks that could limit aggression and avoid mutually assured destruction. We've long since moved away from that period. The Berlin Wall fell in the 90s, and from then on we had the unipolar moment, with the US as the hegemon in geopolitics. But as we moved into the 2020s and China began to rise, it seems like we've moved away from a period of US dominance into competitive multipolarity, the great power competition. As the old order falls, the rules are increasingly becoming negotiable or ignored altogether. And when these rules weaken, we see fears and anxiety drive national and global security. Russia's invasion of Ukraine has just reached its fourth year, with no real signs of the conflict coming to an end soon. The US has called on European governments to take up more of the slack, as America doesn't seem interested in leading efforts anymore. Meanwhile, countries bordering Ukraine and Russia are increasingly becoming concerned that they could be the next target. On the other hand is the US, the reliable security guarantor whose partnership perhaps can no longer be counted on. After America's threat towards Greenland and Canada, it seems Europe has finally started to reckon with the idea that it may have to rely upon itself. It's the combination of these factors that is forcing Europe to react. With this in mind, it's easy to see why even a state like Poland, which historically has been a buffer between Western Europe and Russia, is now seeking a nuclear defense system, unsure of NATO's capacity to defend it, and concerned with Russia's aggression. That's also why the German government has recently strongly called on France to increase its defense spending. The French government itself, for years, has been calling for a European defense force. Once, NATO was the answer. Now, the question is self-reliance. Perhaps a European defense force will finally emerge, but all of that means much greater investment in national security and defense, which could be the start of a vicious cycle of militarization. Fear over rival militarization. More militarization. It's an arms race to the bottom, the classic security dilemma in a multipolar system. Conventional arms races are dangerous, but nuclear competition changes the entire logic of conflict. In February 2026, New START, the US-Russia bilateral nuclear arms control agreement, expired. meaning that going forward, neither Russia nor the US has any limits on how many nuclear weapons they can produce. We already have enough nuclear weapons to destroy humanity many times over, but when states are led by fear and competition, no one wants to seem weaker than the other. And so, alongside a likely general arms race, the nuclear arms race may return with force. There are political and economic considerations which may prevent this, but it is worth remembering that this is the first time since the 1970s that the superpowers have been so unconstrained by international law with regard to nuclear weapons. The desire for nuclear weapons will only expand. It's a fear that we see reflected throughout the world. One only has to look at the growing possibility of war with Iran to see fears over nuclear anxiety. And on the flip side, one only has to look to North Korea to see the security that nuclear arms can provide. Iran is on the brink of war with the US, whereas nuclear-armed North Korea will remain a rogue nation, unlikable but untouched, unprovoked, simply by virtue of having nukes. In a world where great powers act unilaterally, it's easy to see why nuclear weapons begin to seem like an exceedingly attractive option. When you add together rapid militarization, superpower nuclear consolidation, and deteriorating international norms, you create a recipe for a deeply unstable world. As the arms race returns and the military-industrial complex expands, surplus production will need markets. Sometimes, arms exports will act as geopolitical leverage over countries concerned with national security and defense. Sometimes, markets will be created. It's potentially the beginning of a global instability loop. It all becomes a self-serving, self-fulfilling prophecy. Security dependency could become the number one global industry, the new basis through which we conduct international relations. And this is where we need to be concerned, because as great power competition returns, so does the resource competition. This is where we look back to Marco Rubio's recent statement at the 2026 Munich Security Conference, where he called on Western civilization to band together, to stop apologizing for its colonial past, and to share the resources of a new era.
Before the end of the Second World War, the West had been expanding, pouring out from its shores to cross oceans, settle new continents, build vast empires extending out across the globe. This is what we did together once before. And this is what President Trump and the United States want to do again now, together with you.
Neo-colonialism or resource realism, or are they kind of the same thing? In a world of resource realism, even an alliance as old as the one between Washington and Ottawa is subject to the cold math of supply chains. But even before this statement, countries were responding to a perceived global shift. We're looking at an extremely tense global situation. Still, with nuclear arms on the rise, the cost of direct war between great powers may be too high, forcing them to look at how to influence other regions of the world. And I believe that's exactly what we're seeing with America and its actions in Venezuela, its threats towards Greenland and Canada, as well as with Russia and its invasion of Ukraine, its associations with West African military regimes. We could be seeing the return of a form of regional competition, dependency as control, contestation over influence, and eventually conflict, and often bloody conflict, for the resources that will power the next frontier of technology. Multipolarity itself does not create chaos. It creates competitive anxiety loops. It's rational fear in an unstable system. When the US threatens the Arctic, or Russia pushes for greater influence in the Sahel, it almost feels rational for Poland to want nukes. But when everyone acts on rational fear in this kind of system, the collective outcome is self-inflicted tragedy. Here is the tactical hope. Systems, as I've said before, are made of people, and people can change the variables. Public sentiment is not static. Humanitarian ideals have become more embedded in society than ever before. We still have agency, and diplomacy still exists. Arms control can still return. We have open source tools for transparency that the Cold War architects couldn't even dream of. Keep in mind, the initial arms control agreements probably also seemed impossible in the 70s. Today, regional cooperation could genuinely reshape the world order. If countries are able to trust each other through multilateral or regional structures, perhaps we don't escalate to the point of an inevitable global arms race. It's clear that the age of managed stability is over, and the age of competitive coexistence has begun. Understanding the loop is the first step to breaking it. We can stop the cycle of self-destruction before it reaches terminal velocity. But what do you think? If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, it helps more than you know. And subscribe for more videos on geopolitical power, ideological trends, and changing the world.